are still trying to plead with them to be sensible, to be humane, and to release those hostages that are in there.
After the deadline, we will kill everybody here, all the hostages.
For the first time ever, there's the chance to go behind the cloak of secrecy, that is the SAS. SAS, the complete soldier's story, which includes unseen footage and interviews. Experience the grueling training. The incredible action. The amazing speed. And the unbelievable strength of the greatest fighting force in history. Also available from the explosive and compelling TV series are a further 4 videos.
They always say, luck shines on the brave.
These are the men who risk everything.
When you join a force like the SAS, you know that you'll be used for the best jobs.
Get the SAS's side of the story. Get the videos and get viewing.
The plan was for B Squadron to be loaded into 2 C-130s on the Ascension Isles. We would then fly across the South Atlantic to the Rio Grande Air Base on Tierra del Fuego, crash in on the runway and destroy all the aircraft. We'd disable Exocet missiles, kill all the pilots and the officers' mess, and then abandon the Hercules C-130 aeroplanes. We would then have to escape and evade to the Chilean border on foot, 40 or 50 odd miles away. It would be the biggest operation the SAS had carried out since the Second World War, but it would be a suicide mission. On the 2nd of April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. 3 SAS squadrons were deployed, each given a specific task. My squadron, B Squadron, began examining options to attack an airbase on mainland Argentina and to destroy the jets which were to threaten the task force. D Squadron were tasked to conduct classic SAS hit-and-run raids behind enemy lines on the Falklands. G Squadron were to form the reconnaissance team, gathering the intelligence urgently needed to help plan the recapture of the islands. In one of the most daring SAS operations of the war, 10 4-man patrols were covertly inserted onto the islands 3 full weeks before the British landings. They were on their own. The main British forces were still on the Ascension Isles, 3,500 miles away.
It was early hours of the morning when we left Hermes. The journey was about 150 miles and my patrol were landed by helicopter 20 odd miles away from our observation post. It took us about 5 nights to reach it over difficult and very exposed terrain. We had to take everything we would need to survive behind enemy lines for at least a month. And each man was carrying about 130 pounds of kit. A lot of the weight was made up by weapons and bullets. If it all went wrong, we weren't going to carry all that weight over 20 miles just to surrender. We were worried about minefields, but there was just no time to check for them. Being lead scout, I just wouldn't have had any idea if I was walking into one until it was too late. We'd be moving for most of the night, and before daybreak we'd make a slit trench and then disappear for the rest of the daylight. I remember once I was already in my sleeping bag, and usually when you're laying in a sleeping bag, you're quite warm. But this sleeping bag was soaking wet. It was freezing cold, and I was dreaming that I was actually digging up a road with a pneumatic drill. I was actually shaking like that, and I woke myself up with the shaking. If it's dark, you can get up and do some press-ups or whatever to keep warm. But in the daylight, you've just got to wiggle your toes, wiggle your hands, and so on. Just tense yourself up every now and again so that you can get the blood flowing through the veins. Our feet were in pretty shit state. Some of us had trench foot, and I still haven't regained all the feeling in my toes. We were positioned above the Argentinian garrison and air base at Goose, which posed one of the biggest threats to the proposed British beachhead at San Carlos. We were tasked to establish how many troops there were and assess the strength of the defenses. We were building up a picture for the troops that would actually be taking out Goose. In order to get into the best position, it was necessary for us to set up our observation post under the main flight route for the Picaras, Chinooks and Hueys all flying around. So it was quite difficult sometimes lying in these shell scrapes when these aircraft were using this hilltop as a navigational aid. They came so low that sometimes you'd just be choking on the exhaust fumes. Nighttime was our busiest time. We'd send off our situation reports by Morse back to Hermes, where they were logging all the information that was sent to them from all of our 10 patrols, building the big picture. This was our most vulnerable time, as the enemy could well have intercepted our signal and pinpointed our position using a location finder. In this event, we had no hope of any backup. It would have been a fight to the death. Everything we saw, we passed back in our situation reports. We initially reported that we could see at least 600 Argentinian soldiers dug in, which is a battalion, although they were later reinforced. We could also see 8 Pucara ground attack aircraft as well as a fuel dump. We called in an airstrike on these targets, and it was spectacular to see it happen, watching the fuel dump blow up and just disintegrate in front of us. There was one time at night when we heard this Argentinian helicopter really loaded down with men flying from Port Stanley to reinforce Goose. It was flying so low and so slowly it would have been easy to shoot it out of the sky. But that would have risked giving away our position, and we couldn't take the risk. Our fight was with our eyes and ears.
The patrol moved out several nights before Tupar arrived to attack Darwin and Goose Green. By this time, reinforcements had swelled the Argentinian garrison to 1,300 men. Outnumbered 3-1, Tupara recaptured the settlement against overwhelming odds in one of the most bitterly fought battles of the war. While G Squadron continued to gather intelligence, my squadron was finalising plans for the attack on the airbase in Argentina. By the time we got to Ascension, we were fully committed to the Entebbe-type raid. All intelligence reports indicated that this was a high-risk operation. There was a lot of apprehension amongst the squadron members about this mission. When you join a force like the SAS, you know that you'll be used as tactical troops used for difficult jobs, be used for the best jobs, and that's what we get paid for. If you don't like it, you can leave any time you want. I believe the way the head shed looked at it, we would be sacrificed so that many more lives could be saved in the task force. Just one missile hitting Hermes would have put the whole Falklands operation in jeopardy. They believed if we knocked out the Super E's and the Exocets, we could save the two carriers from destruction. And the British Army at the end of the day would have achieved their aim, which was victory on the Falklands. Come H hour, Sergeant Major B Squadron got us all together. His words were, "It's a go. Get the gear, prime the grenades, charge the magazines, the trucks are outside, load up and we'll go to the C-130s. We climb onto the trucks, we sit there waiting. I could see the C-130s gearing up about 200 or 300 meters away. You're beginning to think about the battle ahead. You're beginning to have your reservations, you're beginning to weigh up the options. You hope that your weapon doesn't jam when you need it to be working 100%. You're trying to remember if you can fire the M202 properly. Will it work? Will it blast the jet? Will it do the business? All these things are running through your mind. You're waiting, this is the worst bit. You know it's going to all happen very shortly. And then suddenly the OC appears. A brief conversation in the lead truck. And then it ripples down through the trucks. Operation scrubbed. That's it, boys. You're off the truck. Your first thought, in fact, is disappointment. You're so hyped up and ready to go. You just want to do it. You want to get on with it. You want to do the job. And then you start to think, good old SAS common sense has taken over. I finally realised that this would have been a suicide mission. Instead of sending the entire squadron in the C-130, the new option was to send in an 8-man team by helicopter. They were to locate the airbase and destroy the aircraft themselves. They loaded into a stripped-down, long-range helicopter for the low-level dash to the mainland. If there was any problem with locating the drop-off point, they were to be flown onto the border with Chile and to conduct the mission from there. It was a one-way flight. The helicopter crew were briefed to ditch the chopper in Chile and initiate the explosives that had been packed into the chopper floor. As they approached the mainland, the handheld radar warning device suddenly began to ping, warning the patrol and the pilot that a hostile radar had locked on. It now pinged continuously. It was agreed that the mission should continue. They made an attempt to find the first drop-off position, nearly crashing into the side of a hill, until they found a valley where they could fly up undercover, land the chopper, and do a PNG sweep of the area, looking for the drop-off point. By this time, the chopper was drastically short of fuel. There could be no more map recce's of the area, or else they wouldn't reach the ditching point in Chile. The border option was on. Drop off on the Chilean border. Do the job from there, get out quickly, hit and run. After drop-off, no one knew exactly where they were. But by mid-afternoon, the team were already deep inside Argentina and were heading for the Rio Grande Air Base. They sent their first radio message back to Hereford, informing base that they were in enemy territory. The Eagle has landed. But by now 2,000 Argentinian Marines were searching the countryside for them. The patrol was all for carrying on with the mission, despite the huge odds stacked against them. But it was decided by the head shed that the time scale and the distance involved precluded the hit-and-run operation. Therefore, the ops room in Hereford decided to abort the mission. The patrol now went into the recovery and extraction phase.
Far from being lost and bewildered and wandering through the rugged Chilean countryside as at first thought, it now seems the British crew have been successfully spirited out of Chile. Sources talk of a top-secret operation which led to between 3 and 5 British crew from the Sea King flying out of Punta Arenas, probably on one of the daily commercial flights. Chilean investigators assure the crew deliberately destroyed the helicopter with an incendiary grenade. It seems the incident is so shrouded in secrecy that few people, except senior Chilean Air Force commanders, know the details.
Close to San Carlos, the site of the intended British landings, lay Pebble Island. Following airstrikes against Port Stanley, Argentinian aircraft had been dispersed to the Pebble Island airstrip. These included Pucara ground attack aircraft, which could have devastated the British forces as they landed. The threat had to be removed, the aircraft had to be destroyed, and the job was handed over to D Squadron.
Well, we had very sparse information, most of it supplied by overflights by fast jet. It was decided, therefore, to infiltrate a reconnaissance team by canoe, which is the way that it actually occurs. A small team was infiltrated onto the landmass adjacent and then paddled across onto Pebble Island, cached their boats and conducted a reconnaissance of the target. The team confirmed that there was settlement that was garrisoned by Argentinian forces, possibly up to 200 men, aircraft crews, maintenance crews, and 11 aircraft sitting on the airstrip uncamouflaged. So the assault team had explosive charges in standard charge form, and everybody carried their own personal weapons and as large a quantity as ammunition as they could carry. Well, we deployed from HMS Hermes, which had to come fairly close in so that the aircraft could be within range. We flew in very low level and were dropped off onto a predetermined helicopter landing site. We then moved off to conduct the assault. Withdrew, somebody command detonated landmines. The lads received a couple of injuries. One was concussion and one lad actually got shrapnel wounds, although they were very superficial. They were helped back off the target and everybody made the rendezvous, and then we got out as quickly as possible. But I remember looking back and just seeing a sea of flame. You know, it was a great feeling, and we all knew that we'd done it without loss of life and with a very minor injury. Diversionary raids were planned to create the impression that there was a large either airborne force or heliborne force arriving to take the interest away from the beach landings that were going to be conducted in San Carlos Sound. To that end, we had 4 separate targets to take on at troop level. We deployed onto unrecceed helicopter landing sites. They put us onto the ground in 4 different locations, and we went off cross-country, very, very heavily laden with equipment. We got onto the targets, attacked them without any reconnaissance, and then packed up, and then had the long march back to San Carlos, which we knew was going to be our final rendezvous point. Having conducted the assaults, and I say all we did was deliver the firepower. We didn't even follow up to check whether we'd hit anybody or anything. You know, that was the aim of it, was just to make a big noise and get out. It was necessary for us to transfer from Hermes to the assault ships, and we deployed onto a HMS Intrepid, which was the marine carrier. And we do this by what they call cross-decking, which we got very good at. This means throwing everything on board an aircraft, getting on the aircraft, sitting on top of the kit, flying off to the next ship, unloading the aircraft, putting the stuff to bed as quickly as possible. It was like a helicopter ride. You know, you got on the helicopter, you transferred ship, you got off. You know, it was a habit. And then suddenly, literally the last lift of the squadron out was loaded with the remnants of mountain troop, squadron headquarters, and elements of G Squadron and attached personnel. Suddenly the red glow of the helicopter wasn't there anymore. That unfortunately, tragically, never made the ship and crash into the sea. Some people actually watched it happen, which was fairly horrific. Luckily enough, though, several of the guys managed to survive that, and although the loss was horrendous, I don't believe since World War II we've ever had a loss like that in one go. And even more importantly, the hardest thing to come to terms was with that it was an accident. 20 very good men went to the bottom of the sea.
The crash affected the whole regiment. Most of the lads who had assaulted the airstrip on Pebble Island went down in that chopper. There had been deaths before, but not like 20 guys all at once. It's usually 1 or 2 guys getting killed, but for 20 to be lost like that was just an unbelievable blow. No one was sure why the helicopter went down, but they think it hit an albatross. If they'd been killed in an ambush or something like that, okay, it's still a waste of life, but at least they would have died soldiering. It seemed a total waste for no apparent reason. They were good lads, and they'll never be forgotten.
We were initially sent down from Ascension to the South Atlantic to reinforce D Squadron following the tragic helicopter crash. In order to get to the South Atlantic as quickly as possible, we had to parachute into the sea off the Falklands and rendezvous with HMS Andromeda. After many hours flying, we were given the orders, action stations, stand by. So we made our way to the tailgate. I was number 1 in the stick. Tailgate open, you clipped on. I could see HMS Andromeda below. Red on, green go. You launch yourself out into space and you get a severe buffeting by the slipstream of the aircraft. You plummet downwards, you can feel the jerk of the chute being deployed above you. Grab your lift webs to steer. You have to release your equipment, which is suspended by 2 hooks around your front. You're into the sea, the chute collapses down in front of you. You have to release the canopy, and now you've got to start treading water. You've got a diver's dry suit on you. You've got to hold your hands out of the water because your fingers are exposed to the cold. Also, your head's exposed to the cold. You tread water, and you hope you'll soon be picked up by the rigid radar. I could see the lights starting to come on HMS Andromeda, and I was drifting further away. I'd been in the water now about 25 minutes. I could feel the hands going numb. I could feel the extremities of the face going numb. I rose up onto the peak of the next wave, and luckily I could see the rigid radar heading towards me, which meant that within minutes I was lifted into the boat, transported at a fast rate of knots towards HMS Andromeda. As the landings began, British ships were being sunk at the rate of almost 1 a day. The British task force faced the probability of losing one of the aircraft carriers, Hermes or Invincible, which would have jeopardized the entire British operation to recapture the Falklands. On the 25th of May, 2 Argentinian Super E's approached the task force and fired 2 deadly Exocet missiles, sinking the Atlantic Conveyor, a ship loaded with vital supplies for the British forces. The threat to the aircraft carriers could no longer be tolerated. The mainland option was back on. A small submarine had recently arrived in San Carlos Bay. It was small enough to avoid coastal defenses around the mainland of Tierra del Fuego. The mission was to travel in HMS Onyx, arrive offshore mainland Argentina, inflate rubber assault craft on the submarine casing. We would then load up all the ammunition, weapons, explosives, M202s, grenades, the full complement of war. The submarine would then submerge. We would float off and head to the beach and do a tactical landing. From the landing point, we'd make our way across country by foot to the airbase at Rio Grande. We'd set up an OP and assess the situation. We would then decide whether to bring the squadron in to do the job or whether it was feasible to do the job ourselves. We loaded all our kit and equipment aboard the submarine. We submerged and headed towards Argentina. On the way, under cover of darkness, we practiced our float-off to perfection. We arrived undetected off the coast of Tierra del Fuego and sat on the ocean floor waiting for the green light. They always say, luck shines on the brave. If you've ever been in a big battle, like I have, certain things happen to get you off the hook, things that are unexplainable. The green light never came. The submarine commander, after 5 days on the ocean floor, received the now famous signal, "White flags are flying in Stanley." It was the 14th of June, 1982. Victory.
Mr. Major used his first speech at the United Nations to announce Britain's intention to enter the war on drugs in Colombia. He told the General Assembly that parents today have no peace of mind, fearing their children could be exposed to the lethal menace of narcotics.
British troops are going there to train. The violence is directed by the drug barons against us and against our children. And we think it is entirely proper to help the Colombians. We have no intention of abandoning them to deal with that problem on their own.
April 89, the SAS go in. Their task, destroy the cartels, take out the drug factories.
1989, Margaret Thatcher, tied in with the then American president, started to get very concerned about all the drugs movements through America and through Europe and obviously into England. And they decided to try and make some sort of effect against the drug cartels and reduce it at source rather than trying to fight it on the streets. They got together and decided the best way to go about it was to send special forces down into Colombia with the Colombian government's permission to try and have a go at the cartels. It was decided that they wouldn't actually deploy down there operationally fighting the cartels. So it was decided to actually aim it at training the Colombians in anti-drug operations, special forces capabilities. There were two major drug cartels, one being run by Pablo Escobar, the other one by Gacha. Gacha was actually taken out a while just before we got there, which left Pablo Escobar as the main player there. Right from the start, we never knew who we could trust. You could have somebody killed for as little as $5.
This is the most violent of cities. There's a killing here every 3 hours, some committed by these motorcycle gangs who work on retainers for the cartel.
After we'd been there a while, we were to find out that there was a price on our heads of at least $25,000. Escobar's farm was literally a paradise. He made himself a paradise there. But he was very security conscious. He trusted very few people, and he knew that people were constantly after him, his own people as well as the government or terrorist groups. I don't believe he had any sort of character about him at all, apart from being a ruthless thug. You know, he was ruthless. If he wanted somebody dead, he'd have him dead. At the end of the day, they are killers. They've got in their position by killing people, and they're using money and drugs to influence all sorts of different operations, and they're trying to make themselves look respectable out of this. And those people deserve to be taken out and put away.
In 1989, I was in Hereford, and I was between jobs at the time, and happened to be sitting in a public bar, thoroughly depressed about the thought of not having any work. And through the door of the bar came a friend of mine, and he approached me about doing some work in South America. He told me that they actually wanted a person assassinated, and when I was told who it was, it immediately lifted my morale, and I had this feeling of sort of well-being that I could actually go away and do some work which was worthwhile. The job was to assassinate a drugs baron, the leading drugs baron in the world. His name was Pablo Escobar. And basically what we had to do was to go to South America, assault his house, which was called Hacienda Nápoles, and terminate him at his house.
These men are hired to kill Colombia's most notorious drugs baron, Pablo Escobar. The operation started here in the Colombian city Cali. The 12 Britons hired by a Colombian known as the Don slipped quietly into town and moved into a remote estate just outside the city.
We arrived in South America, and we were taken to a training area after a briefing. And I ran the men through a series of little tests, and just to see where the standard of training was. And we eventually built a sort of a hierarchy, a pecking order, if you want to call it that. And we formed ourselves into 3 different teams, with myself in charge.
This was to be their base, tucked away in a clearing in the jungle, a small wooden hut. While the men trained and planned for the hit on the target 250 miles away, they were fed and supplied by Colombians hired locally. Fishing for food in the river was one way of testing their explosives and zeroing in the sights on armor-light rifles. By now, the armory was virtually complete. The men wore gloves to ensure there were no fingerprints on shell casings left behind. Next to arrive was the first of 2 helicopters to be used in the operation. By now, the second helicopter in Army colours had also arrived, and it was time to start rehearsals. The plan was to fly low over Escobar's estate, dropping 5 40-pound satchels of explosives on his house before the assault team landed and swept through, killing anybody who came in their way.
The enemy forces on the target were approximately 81 men, of which 16 were with Pablo Escobar. You may think this a bit strange, you know, why would 12 men go and take on 80? But when you think of it, there was no group bigger than 12. And the fact is we were carrying enough ammunition on us to kill approximately 3,000 men. So when you balance it up, the firepower that we also had a helicopter gunship available. It balanced the whole thing out and made the whole plan feasible. So we got to the stage and we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. Action and casualties. What happens if a helicopter goes down? What happens if one of the men go down? What medical kit do we have available? What happens if the helicopter crashes? The whole thing was ironed out in the rehearsals that we did. And you know, I have been brought up in a school that luck is a combination of experience and skill. And the more skilled you are, the luckier you'll be.
They were now waiting for the intelligence report to come through that the drugs baron was at home. On June the 4th, the message came through, and loaded to the hilt, they left to kill their target. But as the team flew low over the mountains towards their first refueling stop, the weather closed in. The helicopters were separated, and the second one crashed into a mountainside.
64, 67,
When we hit the ground, the chopper turned over, and the blades of the chopper were still turning. Never get out of the chopper until the blades stop. So I immediately started screaming to the men, don't move till the blades stop, don't move till the blades stop. At this time I was hanging upside down, but my legs were jammed in the door of the helicopter. I looked at the pilot. His left leg and his left arm were totally severed. I couldn't get a drip into him, and I asked for what morphine we had available, and I put it into the pilot. I found myself getting into deep, deep shock. There was no needles left for the medical packs, and the drips were thrown all over the place. I eventually found a drip. I couldn't put it into myself, so I actually broke the top, and I started actually drinking the drip and squeezing the litre of fluid into myself to try and stem the shock. I was extremely dizzy, and then it was then that I realised that the extent of the injuries I had. I'd broken 4 ribs at the front, broken 4 at the back, and some old parachute injuries that I had were actually aggravated. I went into a state of collapse, and one of the men pulled me onto a little ledge, and he left me there. And as the group walked out, one of the men asked me if I wanted his Uzi. He was the Colombian interpreter. I says no, and I thought for a couple of minutes. I thought he was just escorting them off the ridge. And the group went away, and I was left on my own on the ridge. I'd broken one of the rules of survival. I should have made someone stay with me. I couldn't get contact with the men, being as that they'd taken the radio with them to signal to the helicopter. And I lay on the ridge, and something told me that they were not coming back for me. I was something like 20 yards from the helicopter, and it took me the best part of 30 minutes to actually crawl to the helicopter and recover what kit I had available. By this time, the pilot had died. I managed to get some shell dressings, salvage some drips. I found a can of beans and a couple of packets of biscuits and some explosives. I moved onto the ridge, and I settled myself down. I tore open the shell dressings, and I put them inside my jacket to give me some insulation. And I lay there on the ledge for the rest of that night. And as first light came, I thought maybe someone will be here to pick me up. No one came. I lay there all that day, and the main thing was to try and keep myself alive. On the second day, I had no sense of time. I didn't know what time it was. I was totally disorientated, and all I could do was claw back what training I had, what had actually been punched into me by people, and the main thing was to stay alive. But all I had to draw on was training. What had I been told? How had I been trained beforehand? How had it been put across to me by my instructors? And can I tell you, when you're in that situation, it actually gets through to you. I drew on advice from people unknown. I drew on the fact that I'd spoken to prisoners of war and people who'd escaped, and how they managed to survive in adverse conditions. And finally, I drew on my faith. I was brought up as a Catholic, and I sat there on the ridge, and I was trying to make a deal with God. You know, him and I were sitting, sort of talking to each other, and you know, I mulled through it, and I said, you know, should I promise to be a good boy, never to do anything wrong again, go to church and do this? And I said, I can't do that, because I've let the man down so many times before. So the best deal I could actually give my maker in these conditions was, I made a deal with him that if I got rescued, that I would not scream with the pain or winch. And I left it at that. And I managed to get through the best part of that second day. And I could hear some chopping in the distance and things starting going through my mind. Here I am lying in bad man's territory. I can hear these noises. Are people coming to rescue me? Or is someone coming to do the business on me? And this has gone through my head the whole time. And what's actually, the assault on the mind at the moment is what am I going to do if it's the baddies? And the whole thing that was going through my mind was, you know, how to die properly. You know, how could I, if I did go to my, you know, my maker like a warrior, and a number of things came up. I remember my wife saying to me, why don't you concentrate, you soldiers concentrate so much in dying rather than living, why don't you concentrate in living? And then I remember reading a book, and it said, we owe God a death. He that dies today is quit for tomorrow. And as I say, the chopping sound was getting closer and closer to me. And eventually, I could hear Spanish voices. I couldn't hear any English speaking. I thought, if it would have been anybody to do with me, they may have brought some of my men with them. So I made that decision then. I said, right, if I do go, I'm going to take as many of these people as I can with me. So I stacked up what magazines I had for the submachine gun. I took a hand grenade and I pulled the pin out of it and I held it in my hand. I held the submachine gun in my other hand. And my intention was to die like a soldier should it come about. I lay there until the people were almost on top of me, and I sort of just sprung and I shoved the submachine gun into a man's stomach who didn't see me. And he immediately threw his hands up in the air and he started screaming, amigo, amigo. He said, I'm your friend, I'm your friend. And I realised that help had suddenly got to me.
Soldier Mac made it back to London and prepared to return to Colombia for a second hit. These mercenaries were embarrassing to the government and to the regiment and had to be stopped. No one would like to think they was operating in a theatre of operations where perhaps former colleagues were also operating and it could be a threat to them or a potential threat. That is not a healthy environment. The establishment made a call.
I met them at the top of the stairs. One was late 50s, early 60s, very composed. The impression I got was that the chap he was a bit of a bureaucrat of some type. The other chap, he looked like the operator type, the operative. He never said an awful lot, he just made the introduction. Please come in, please. The impression I got, they were telling me they had knowledge of everything that was going on, and they were letting me know that they knew everything that was going on.
Now, Peter, our sources tell us that you've just come back from a trip from Colombia. Now, who authorised this trip?
No one.
What do you mean no one? So you went all the way to Colombia?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Under your own steam, under your own heading?
Under my own steam.
For what purpose?
I went to try and pick up on the job I was doing before, and then Karen, I think you know what it was.
I may know what it is, but I want you to tell me. That's what I'm asking you.
I felt I was being spoken to like a naughty boy. Well, I was out there, and I think you know what it was. And if you didn't know what it was, there's something wrong, because we informed the Americans what was actually going on.
You informed the Americans?
Yes, we did.
You felt it necessary to inform the Americans, but you didn't feel it necessary to inform Her Majesty's government?
You were informed by the Americans, I know for a fact you were.
Why? So, exactly.
We never actually thought of the British government at the time, in that we felt it was not in their sphere. So consequently, we informed sources in Washington, and the word we got back from was get on with the job, get it done, and get it quickly and get out.
Now, I can assure you now, Peter, that it's only by good luck and good fortune that you've returned from this trip. Because if we had our way, you would certainly not be coming back, and you wouldn't have come back, and you'd have been buried in some bog out in the middle of the jungle, and that would have been the end of the story as far as we were concerned.
What are you actually saying?
What am I saying?
Yeah.
Well, do you want me to really split it out for you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we were going to take you out.
Who?
It doesn't matter who. You know you don't ask who.
And how?
What? Well, there's only one way you can take people out, isn't there? Yeah. And if we say we didn't want you to come back and we're going to take you out, that doesn't actually mean we're going to take you out for a walk, does it? It means we're going to take you out permanently. And permanently means permanently.
One of the things they kept saying, did you know you were going to be shot down on the way back from the target? And they assumed that I hadn't catered for that type of thing happening to us, and in actual fact we had. I don't think they gave us credit for actually thinking that this type of thing could happen, because you take out the body and the guys who've taken out the bodies are taken out and everything's all clean at the end of it. For them to assume that we didn't actually plan for that, I felt they didn't give us credit where it was due. Look, I think you'd have been the same person that's been here congratulating me. Had the helicopter had been flying in and made it to target, I crashed on the way to target. The same people, the establishment, you, would have come here and shook my hand and saying, good job, old boy, and whatnot.
Well, that's probably right. But the answer is you've been warned. You've been warned. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the subject. But be rest assured, we'll be looking at you. So I would suggest that you modify the way you do things. Yeah, okay. And I would suggest you perhaps adhere to those rules in future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There were certain conversations going on in Hereford that Peter McAleish was operating in a mercenary capacity in Colombia. He wasn't quite sure exactly what he was doing. It was loosely discussed that perhaps at some stage we may have to take him out, or we would come up against people that he had trained. None of us were happy about that. None of the people that was operating were happy about that. This was one of our own people, but we did not know exactly what he was involved in. But we have no doubt that the government knew at all times what he was involved in. By the early 90s, the SAS-trained anti-narcotic squads were beginning to make inroads into Pablo Escobar's organisation. But it was a constant battle. The production sites were continually being moved.
They'd spotted a couple of airfields and a couple of laboratories where they processed the coke. We went in first, a helicopter came down into a hopper. We all deployed, went into the tree line, followed by another helicopter coming down behind us. Initially, there was only something like 6 of us deploying onto a ground of a force that we had no clue who was in there. We went in, we didn't come under any fire. We got ourselves together and we started to move forward. We come to a clearing where there was a laboratory. All the people in there, apart from a couple of the peasants that were obviously sort of in there mixing it, had obviously gone, they'd fled. We moved into the laboratory and we could see just a complete distillery, if you like, for cocaine. There are all the different types of stuff that they need to make it, large stores, jars, fridges, generators, they're running everything, stills. So they then decided to destroy everything that was there. So they torched everything, they put gasoline around it and then they torched it.
Despite these successes, Escobar could never be found. Whenever we got close, he would just disappear.
And when the operations I was talking about, when they were actually after Pablo Escobar, they deployed some of the troops we had trained in a number of small 4-ton pickup vehicles. And they put too many people in the vehicles, and they blew the vehicle up, scattering something in the region of 30 to 40 people. And then the drug cartels actually come out of hiding, went round, selected the officers and shot them all in the head.
Despite these setbacks, the training continued.
We were literally taking them from scratch, teaching them how to use their weapons that they already had. We were teaching them all the different field craft they would need to know, and working all the way up through that type of scenario to working as a company, so they could move in support of each other with good communications, good command and control, and work against the cartels using offensive tactics.
Chaotic scenes at the funeral service for Pablo Escobar, drug trafficker, billionaire, killer, but a hero to thousands in his home city of Medellin. The guns that surrounded him in life surrounded him in death, though brandished now by the military that hunted and shot him. Escobar, who had the blood of hundreds on his hands, died almost defenseless, trying to escape across a rooftop. He'd been shot repeatedly by troops who had surrounded the 2-story house. The authorities say they tracked him with electronic equipment, programmed to recognize his voice on the telephone. The Colombian president says the killing is a massive step towards ending the drug trade.
We knew we could have an impact if we could get it right. It took us a few years to get it right, but we did get it right. There is no doubt that the operations that took place there from ourselves did have an effect on the drug cartels. That we reduced the flow of cocaine from Colombia. The people we trained had a direct effect on the drugs war, and there's no doubt about that. It's only the SAS that could have provided that training for them.